Gorgons, these creatures had 3 heads, 6 eyes, wings, claws, snake hair and breath that turned people to stone. And despite being universally feared, they were somehow also seen as a representation of something more. So, who were the Gorgons, and why did the Greeks think they looked like Persians? Well, in this episode, we'll dive deep into their anatomy and everything there is to know about Gorgons. The Gorgons were terrifying monsters in Greek mythology. They were female demons that lured unsuspecting travelers away from their path with beauty and magic only to devour them. They lived far to the west, according to Hesiod, in a place called the Far West where there was a country called Thule. Not only do they have wings, but their clothing bears no resemblance to Median dress. The earliest and most famous confrontation between the Greeks and the Persians happened at the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. The Persian king Darius wanted to punish the rebellious Ionian Greeks for supporting the Spartans in their war with the Median. After all, they had heard stories about these monsters since they were kids, and now they were facing a seemingly endless horde of barbarian invaders. And although the Persians may not have looked like Gorgons, the Athenians must have thought they acted like them. You see, Gorgons were known for their uncanny ability to lure victims into traps and then slay them. Then a heavy rainstorm came and washed away the Persian siege engine. With their supply lines cut off, the Persians were forced to retreat back to Asia Minor, and many scholars believe that the Persians used a similar tactic on the Greeks. And as the centuries pass, their number goes from 1 to 3. Their serpent hair and venomous breath represent the frightening ambiguity of the non-Greek world. It was a place where people could turn you to stone with a single glance, and where men preyed on innocent travelers and lured them away with false promises. And as the Greeks became more familiar with the cultures of the Near East, they began to see threats everywhere. The Medes, who wore distinctive headdresses with long flowing tails, inspired the snake-like locks of the Gorgons, and the loose, baggy trousers of the Persians inspired their claws and talons. In fact, the word Gorgon is thought to derive from the old Persian word Gargash, meaning mountain demon. Whatever the case, the Greeks took these foreign features and combined them into a new creature. A creature that looked like a combination of the most frightening things they learned about the Persians and the Medians. Some scholars think this reflects a gradual cultural shift in which the Greeks went from fearing one monster to seeing multiple monstrous traits in their enemies. These traits manifested in the winged, serpent-haired Medusa, the 3-headed, man-eating Scylla, and the bird-like stone-cold Gorgon over time. The Greeks lumped these 3 monsters together and called them all Gorgons. For decades before Marathon, the Persians had sent messengers to the various city-states demanding that they submit and become tributaries to them. Most of the city-states ignored these demands, except for the island of Chios. When the Chians refused to pay tribute, the Persians invaded and punished them severely. According to Herodotus, they burned down every house in the city and enslaved every inhabitant. And so when the Athenians heard about what had happened to the Chians, they knew that if they didn't fight, the same thing would happen to them. He assembled a massive navy and landed his troops in the coastal region of Attica, just a few miles north of Athens. But there was another reason as well. You see, after the Greeks won at Marathon, they were so euphoric that they started to believe they were invincible. This hubris led them to take on the much larger Persian army at the Battle of Thermopylae, where they fought to the death, except for 300 Spartans. When the news reached Athens that Leonidas and his Spartan force had been killed, the people of Athens were terrified. They begged the oracle at Delphi if they should flee to the Peloponnese or stay and fight. The oracle told them to do neither, and instead offered a cryptic prophecy: salvation will come from the wooden wall. So when the Persians arrived outside the city, the Athenians barricaded themselves inside the walls and prepared to defend themselves. The Athenians and their allies assembled a force of about 20,000 men to stop them every night. The Athenians would watch in horror as huge flaming arrows shot through the air, setting houses and shops ablaze. The people of Athens were so desperate that they were willing to try anything to save their city, including human sacrifice. According to Plutarch, they took 18 pairs of male lovers and sacrificed them to the gods. And true enough, the next morning, a strong wind blew through the city, scattering the Persians and giving the Athenians a chance to regroup. Could this have been the work of the Gorgons? Perhaps after all, the Greeks believed that the Gorgons were under the direct control of Athena, who was the patron deity of Athens. And in Hesiod's Theogony he says that when Typhon tried to attack Athena, she turned her into a stone with her magical gaze. So maybe the Athenians prayed to Athena to send a Gorgon to save them. But the Persians were so numerous that most of the Greek generals wanted to flee into the hills and use guerrilla tactics to harass their supply lines. But one general, Miltiades, argued that if they ran away, Dias would keep coming back until either the Greeks had been utterly crushed or the Persians had taken over all of Greece. He told the generals that if they were going to lose, they might as well lose trying to defeat the invaders head-on. His plan was to bait Darius into attacking the Athenians in the open field at the plain of Marathon, just a few miles northeast of Athens. In fact, if anything, they look more like Greeks, since winged female warriors were usually depicted wearing a chiton and a himation, Greek outfit. Clearly, the Athenians didn't think that Gorgons looked like Persians. In fact, they probably thought they looked exactly like them. This place was unactually mapped by any of the ancient Greeks and most likely does uncorrespond to any real place. But it was said to be home to many monsters like the giant Alcyoneus, the Lernaean Hydra, the golden-hued man-eating maidens of the Lake District, and of course the Gorgons. Miltiades convinced the other generals to attack the Persians before they could finish training their hoplites, and the two sides clashed along the banks of the river Elis from the beginning. It was clear that this wouldn't be like any other battle the Greeks had fought. As the Persian king watched the battle from atop a nearby hill, he sent in wave after wave of soldiers to break the Greek lines, but they kept coming back for more. Even when their comrades lay dead and wounded around them, the Greeks fought on, not because they wanted to kill the Persians, but because they didn't want to survive another Persian invasion. And after 7 hours of fighting, the Greeks finally broke through the Persian lines and chased them all the way back to their ships. Gorgons are always described as having 3 heads, each with a set of eyes, fangs, and a tongue that dripped venomous saliva. They had bat-like wings and sharp talons, and their bodies were covered in hard scales. But perhaps the most disturbing feature of all of them was their hair, which was made up of writhing snakes that hissed and struck out at anyone who got too close. Although they were clearly terrifying, the Greeks felt compelled to include Gorgons in their art, often depicting them as companions of their gods. In one famous scene, for example, Athena and Poseidon emerge from the earth fully grown, and Athena slays the Gorgon Typhon with her spear, while Poseidon tames another Gorgon named Echidna and makes her immortal, and one of its metopes depicts the very first battle between the two sides. It is often taken as the first appearance of the Persians in Greek art and shows a group of Persian soldiers in distinctive Median dress facing off against a pair of winged Gorgons. The point of this metope, like all the others, is to show a moment of violence. The rightmost Gorgon has already slashed at the soldier nearest her with her dagger, causing him to fall backwards. The second Gorgon is lunging forward with both hands outstretched, ready to strike. One of her snakes even comes out of her mouth to coil around the head of the fallen soldier, and the third Gorgon looks like she's just witnessed a horrific scene, dropping her shield and covering her mouth in horror. Meanwhile, the Persian soldiers don't seem particularly scared. One raises his dagger in defense and the other holds a bow and a quiver full of arrows. And although there are dozens of scenes showing Athena and other gods interacting with the Gorgons, none of them show what they look like. That is until we get to the Temple of Athena Nike at the Acropolis in Athens. This temple was built in the 4th century BCE to commemorate an Athenian victory over the Persians. The problem with this metope is that the Gorgons look nothing like the Persians. But what led them to make this bizarre comparison? To answer this question, we have to take a journey back in time to the early days of the Greco-Persian Wars. And as it turns out, this is exactly what happened. It's easy to see why the Athenians would have thought the Persians looked like Gorgons. So, the Greeks may have also thought the Persians looked like Gorgons, because they acted like them. Luckily, the Persian king Xerxes turned out to be less patient than Darius and immediately began bombarding the city with siege engines. But regardless of whether Athena sent a Gorgon to help them, the siege lasted only 5 days. So who were the Gorgons? Although they appear in Homeric poetry, they are never given a definite origin story. What's more, their physical features reflect an equally deep-rooted fear of outsiders. So, do you see now how history imitated not just art, but also the mythical creatures? If you do and watch the video, let us know in the comments below.